Want to build your career with CMI confidence? Well, it all starts with the tools at your fingertips. CMI creates workplaces full of inspiring leaders. With its on-demand resources, network of mentors, and industry-leading accreditations. Search CMI Confidence today.
This session is recorded and will be available on the CMI website and YouTube channel. Join the conversation by using the live chat box for your questions and comments. We'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Enabling Open and Effective Communication for Managers and Teams digital event. My name is Cleo and I'm the event delivery coordinator at CMI. Don't forget to join the conversation by using the live chat box, and we'll answer as many questions as we can during the Q&A. I will now hand over to Kevin Morgan, events lead at CMI East Midlands and Eastern Board, to begin the event.
Thank you, Cleo, and good afternoon to everyone. A warm welcome. I'm sure you're all busy people in busy work days, so we'll get straight into it. But so as Cleo mentioned, I'm the events lead for the East Midlands and Eastern Region Board. Essentially, we're a team of volunteers that help put events such as today together. So it's good to be here. We're going to be joined shortly by Joe Keeler from the Managing Director from Belbin. But today we're going to be talking about what I believe to be one of the most important topics of management, and that is communication. And arguably not just management of life as a whole. Effective communication, and Joe's going to be talking about obviously with the use of the Belbin system, but we're going to be talking about the use of effective communication for team engagement, performance and stress reduction. This webinar is going to provide practical strategies to reduce friction and inefficiencies, fostering a collaborative and inclusive environment. And just before we bring Joe in, just let you know that if you want to ask questions as we go, we may pick them up as we go, but generally speaking, we'll pick the questions up at the end. And for those of you who may have seen that on the registration and the reminder emails, there is a link to receive your very own Belbin report. If you haven't done that, make sure you do. And obviously, if you've got it, bring it to hand, because it will come in useful as we go through the session. But like I say, if you haven't got one, you've still got time. There's about a week left to go now before that link gets closed off. So make sure you get that report checked in. So, Joe, if we welcome you into the session. Good afternoon. How are we doing?
Good afternoon, Kevin. Doing very well, thank you, even though it's grey and a little bit miserable here in Cambridge. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. No,
thank you for joining and for giving up your time. It's a privilege to have you on board. So do you want to start by giving us a bit of an introduction to yourself, really, and your background?
Yes, thank you very much. And before I forget, because I have a tendency to forget, I'd just really like to say thank you to Cleo, who has done so much behind the scenes. And, these things don't happen with everybody who are organised. I'm not a very organised person, so I think I really appreciate it. So thank you so much for everything you've done. So, my name's Joe Keeler. I'm the Managing Director at Belbin. 18 months ago, we became an employee ownership trust. So we are now the team company owned by the team, and it's very exciting. Otherwise, I've been with Belbin for 23 years. Joined, obviously, when I was, just out of school. No, not really. But have been part of the team that's been involved in helping people understand their strengths and how to use them when working with others within a team so that the teams become more effective. They work better. There's less time in conflict. There's less time just getting annoyed with everybody. So that's what I do. I run the team here in the UK. I also look after all of our distributors, because Belbin is a worldwide brand and is taught at business schools and management places worldwide. So it's a well-known brand, and I love the team here at Belbin. And hopefully 23 years is not very long, is it?
I was going to say, yeah, that's pretty admirable. 23 years, that's well done. Yeah, but you obviously enjoy it, and that's the great thing. So that's always a good sign.
Every day, she says with a smile. Okay.
Should we get into it?
Yeah. Let's get into it. Brilliant. Thank you. So what are we going to do over the next sort of 55 minutes or so is we're going to talk a little bit about communication, the importance of it. Then I'm going to introduce you to the Belbin framework so that we have a language to talk about communication. And then we're going to, as we go, there's going to be practical tips. And Kevin, I think we'd agreed that rather than just listening to me drone on, it would be quite nice if we made this quite interactive. So if you do have any questions, I'm sure Kevin will, he is allowed to interrupt me. Okay, so if he does interrupt, it's because we've already agreed that that's absolutely fine. Enabling open and effective communication for managers and teams. Why is this important? Kevin, as you've already said, communication is critical when people are working together. We often ask for people to have great communication skills when they apply for jobs, and we know actually that we don't all have great communication skills. I think these are interesting stats just to set the scene for this webinar. There's some studies out there. There's so many studies out there looking at communication. But this top one is interesting, isn't it? 69% of managers say they're uncomfortable communicating with members of their team. I don't know if you agree with that. I also sometimes find it difficult communicating with members of the team. And I'm here at Belbin. I think this is something that's very common. This came from a study in Harvard Business Review, and they were quoting a survey by a company called Interact, for those of you who like to know that these aren't made up. Now, if 69% of us are uncomfortable communicating with members of the team, the fact that we spend 80% of our time in that communicating space means that this is something that we really do need to look at. So we spend 80% of our time communicating. What does that look like? Well, we spend 80% of our time writing emails. We spend 80% of our time reading emails. We spend a lot of our time discussing the emails. We speak to people face to face. We speak to people on a camera. We have a Zoom meeting. We have one-to-ones. We present. We discuss. We facilitate. Every time that we are interacting with others within our team, a level of communication is going on, which emphasizes the reason why we need to work out how to best communicate with our teams. I would say the work that we've done, and that's what we do, we work with teams day in, day out. And I would say that 9 times out of 10, the issues within the team are down to communication, whether or not it's misunderstood communication, clarity of communication. These are the reasons why teams fail. And just to reiterate, I'm really reiterating, I know that, but if you have a team that can communicate, you're less likely to have conflict. You're less likely to have stress. Your levels of engagement are going to be higher. All of this means your turnover of staff is going to be lower because people are actually enjoying being with you and working within the team. So there are so many business reasons, there's so many ROIs that we could quote here. And it actually means that communication is key. So why do we have such a problem? I Googled this several times. Lots of people are taking credit. I'm going for George Bernard Shaw. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place. I don't know about you, but that really resonated when I saw that. We feel that we have written the email, we have spoken. I am speaking to you and communicating with you now. So obviously you are listening and understanding every single word, because we feel that we've communicated and therefore we tick the box. We've done that. When in fact, communication is a two-way street. Just because it's left you doesn't mean that it's been received properly the other way. I like to think about this in, is it Charlie in the Chocolate Factory? You have Mike TV. He gets beamed up, doesn't he? And he goes into the TV. I think it's I can't remember in which format it is. But the fact is that not all of those bits sometimes go across. You could lose something along the way. It's not a really simple, I said this, you heard it, you understood, job done. It is about a two-way level of communication. So what do we do? What do we do to make sure that that communication is received? Richard Branson said, treat people as you'd want to be treated and they will do their best work. That sounds fair, doesn't it? I think we can all agree with that. But you can't put your hands up. Communication, obviously, because you're on the screen. If I treat people how I want to be treated, if I communicate with people how I communicate, then surely that will work out fine. It doesn't, does it? What we need to do is treat people how they want to be treated, and they'll do their best work. Communicate with people how they want to be communicated with, and they'll do their best work. What we need to start thinking about is not me, not I, but how am I communicating with others? How is that being received by other people? How is it best to communicate with each individual? Because believe it or not, everybody's different. Everybody has a different way of communicating, a different way of working. Everybody has a different reason why they're communicating. And once we can understand this, then it becomes a lot simpler. Some people communicate because they're desperate to get the detail absolutely right. Others like communicating as bullet points because they're looking at the broad view. Other people are worried that the depth of knowledge and the detail is not there, so they communicate by telling you everything that they know. There's so many different ways. Understanding that difference of ways to communicate, the differences within the people that you work with, within your team, and understanding their whys, it's all going to be quite critical in improving the communication within the team. Hopefully, I have now set the scene enough. So everybody's going, yeah, we agree. Communication is absolutely vital, but it's not necessarily just looking at ourselves. It's looking at everybody else as well. So we need a language, don't we? We need a language, a framework to be able to understand people within our teams. We need a framework to be able to understand the way that they behave, they interact, and the way in which you can best work with them so that communication is easier. And that's where Belbin comes in. I promised Kevin this wouldn't be a webinar where we went through each of the 9 teams in lots and lots of detail, and that's not what we're going to do. But just to give you a little bit of a brief background about Belbin, some of you would have heard of Belbin team roles, some of you perhaps you haven't, and that's absolutely fine, by the way. What is Belbin? Well, many years ago, back in the 1960s and 70s, Dr. Meredith Belbin worked as part of the Industrial Training Research Unit in Cambridge. His wife, Dr. Eunice Belbin, OBE, was actually his manager and actually ran the Industrial Training Research Unit. And they were contacted by Henley Management School. The reason they were contacted is because Henley Management School were running, I think it's like a precursor to an MBA, these 6-week management courses, which were for those people who had been earmarked for higher echelons of management. So those managers who were seen as they were going to be running the country one day, perhaps, they were put onto this 6-week management course. And part of the way that they learn was by syndicate working together in teams, in groups, which is very different to the standard learning, which is more lecture-based. And Henley were putting these teams together so that we could have this syndicate working. And remember, these were all really high-performing managers. And they found that some teams worked brilliantly, but some teams were just awful. And they couldn't work out why. They had no idea why. They kept changing things. They didn't understand what made some teams successful and some teams less so. That's why they contacted Dr. Meredith Belbin and Dr. Eunice Belbin, because they were kind of experts into research the ways that people work. So they went along, and over a period of 9 years, they studied the heck out of these teams. Everybody who took part in these exercises had to undergo they had the 16PF, which is a personality profile to find out their personality, the Watson-Glaser critical thinking analysis, which is IQ. Then they also had the personal preference questionnaire that looked at their values. And then they had an exercise that took a day. It's called Teamopoly, very loosely based on Monopoly. So they had winners and losers. They were playing these games. They're competing against each other. And whilst this happened, somebody was there. They had a lovely team of anthropologists and chess champions. My God, they were so bright. And every 30 seconds, every half a minute, people were recording what was going on, what was the interaction. And they came up with lots of hypotheses. One hypothesis, it must be intelligent. So they put all the people with really high IQ scores in the same team. And they said, that must be what makes the team successful. And luckily for us mere mortals, that wasn't the case. In fact, not only were they not very good, they were really at the bottom of the rankings. They did appallingly because actually there was just too much arguing going on. They also put similar personalities together. And again, those teams didn't work particularly well. So over a period of 9 years, they looked at different hypotheses. And what they found was in the world of work, there are an infinite different number of behaviors, ways that we interact with people. However, there are only 9, there's a finite group of behaviors which are useful. So although there's an infinite amount of behaviors in the workplace, they found 9 critical clusters of behavior which were needed to facilitate the team's performance. Without all 9 of these behaviors, not 9 people, but 9 behaviors, the teams didn't work well. And at this point, Meredith and his team were able to predict who was going to win these exercises. They could predict it with over 85% accuracy once they knew more about them, once they put them together. So hopefully that was a short introduction to Belbin. And we have these 9 roles, we have these 9 clusters. Let's look at those in a little bit more detail. So we have action-orientated roles. They're the roles that get stuff done. We have the shaper, the one that says, right, we've got to get here and we've got to get here quickly. They're challenging, they drive, they overcome all of the obstacles. They're really competitive. To them, it's not about the people, it's about the task. And they're there to try and get, like I said, things done. Now, they're allowable weakness because all these strengths come with a weakness. It's the flip side. You can't be brilliant at something and something not giving, is that they tend to upset people. And that's okay as long as they can recover that with good humour later on. So how do you communicate with the shaper? How does the shaper communicate? Well, it's an interesting one because they get very frustrated when things don't go quickly. With shapers, they don't need to know all of the details. They need to keep up the pace. They need to see movement going forward. They don't want to discuss whether or not you're working from home and whether or not that's your cat. They're not interested. They are interested in the task at hand. Don't try and sidetrack them at all with anything to do with people. And they should be brought into meetings to make sure it isn't hijacked by these things. So a shaper is bringing that kind of energy. Sometimes you'll hear such statements such as, come on, let's get started. Right, that's enough talk. Let's bring this meeting to a start. Or I feel that we're losing direction here. Come on, let's get going. So these are words, I don't know if you can hear them. Can you hear them yourself saying them? Can you hear other people saying them perhaps? This is one of my top team roles. We also then have the implementer. Now, the implementer is the one who has a slight fetish for Excel, loves organization, loves process, really hardworking, very loyal. Their allowable weakness is that sometimes they don't like change, so they can slow things up a little bit, but that's okay. So how do you communicate with implementers? Well, they're the ones that just switch off when all the ideas are around because they want to know how to practically put those ideas into place. They don't like things which aren't organized, which aren't planned. So bring those ones in to be able to make sure things are planned, but put things in a very logical order for the implementers. They're hardworking. Don't involve them necessarily when action isn't required. You might hear statements such as, has anybody done anything about this yet? Or looking at the practical side of things, how will this actually translate? And then we have the completer finisher. Now, the completer finisher is the one who has a wonderful attention to detail. They've got really high levels, high standards, and they're the ones who are talking about getting things right. So with the completer finisher, their concern, their level of communication will be about checking and checking and checking, not making any mistakes. So again, when you're dealing with the completer finisher, you need to listen to where the anxiety is coming from. You need to be able to work that out. Make sure you're not giving them something that's slapdash. Make sure it's something that you've actually spent some time on doing to get the respect from the completer finisher as well. You'll hear phrases such as, oh, can we just check that one more time? Or can we just go over this again? I don't know if anybody can hear themselves, can hear other people. I said I can very much hear the shaper And I know that sometimes I get frustrated with the implementer needing that logical sequence of events, needing it to be practical. And I can see that frustration, but knowing that, I think, well, actually, we can't go forward unless there's a plan that we need to follow. It's understanding the difference, understanding how it might drive you absolutely mad, but appreciating the fact that it's needed for the team. Getting frustrated by the completer finisher, checking one last time. Can't we just get to the end point? But understanding, again, that the completer finisher is going to make sure you don't look stupid. They're the ones who are making sure that the team actually works and achieves what they need to achieve because they have triple checked again and again and again. So you can understand where you've got these differences and where those frustrations may be. But understanding that they're all needed is pretty critical.
I imagine, sorry, Joe, I imagine everyone's now sitting there pinpointing people in their heads. And I mean, I'm implementing is one of my core strengths, and I already sitting here going, yep, I can feel that. Yep, exactly that. I've heard myself say those.
I'm so glad you said that, Kevin. When we were preparing for this webinar, it's quite interesting that the amount of organization, Kevin, that you'd done beforehand, and you'd asked me for this, and this, and I hadn't given you anything that you needed. And you said, can I have that? I'm like, yes, put me on the spot. Yes, I'll get it done immediately. But if I have to read a spreadsheet and realize that's number 7 in the options, it's going to be far more difficult. So I think that was a great example of how the luckily I knew that it was okay, but how communication styles can differ quite a lot.
I guess that's a prime example of where conflict could start as well, isn't it? Because, like you say, if someone's pushing and pushing, it can upset the cart, shall we say?
It can, and it's because we feel that everybody's the same as us. Everybody should be pushing. Everybody should be organising. It's not the case. You're all needed, but we need to appreciate the difference. We really do. We have these thought-orientated roles here. We have the plant monitor, evaluator, and specialist. The plants are the ones that come up with the original ideas. They're the ones who like to work very much by themselves and think of solutions to problems. Their allowable weakness is sometimes there's so much going on here. Actually, they find it really hard to communicate. In fact, all of these 3 roles do struggle. They're not natural communicators. You may find that the plant, especially when you've been on a screen, they look like they're not engaged and they're flicking their eyes. And it's not that they're not listening. It's because something you've said has sparked another thought. It's not because they're engaged, but they listen to things and immediately their thought processes start working. So don't be too turned off by that. Perhaps with a plant, and we'll talk about this later, a one-to-one discussion may be a little bit better than involving them all the time in teams. So they're looking there for solutions, for ideas. You'll hear statements with, I know this isn't what we normally do, but have we thought about this? Have we thought, actually, I know that's not what the idea of the meeting is, but can we do something along these lines? So we're always looking at something different, which is really frustrating for those who just want to get to the end point. It's really frustrating for the work that's been organised by the implementer, by the energy that's going forth. Is somebody saying, let's now look at it differently. We then have the monitor evaluator. Now, the monitor evaluator is normally, and you can see yourself now, if you're sitting back with your arms crossed, just listening, not saying anything, but listening, you're a high monitor evaluator. Because what you're brilliant at is taking the emotion out of the decision-making process. You get all of the information you need, you weigh up the pros and cons, and you make the right decision. Your allowable weakness is sometimes you're a little bit too cynical. People expect the no, perhaps too frequently. But again, this is a wonderful behavior to make sure the team doesn't go off in the wrong direction. Why do they have problems communicating? Well, because they need to be invited in. With a monitor evaluator, they have all this work, or this decision making at their fingertips, but they're not going to be extrovertly just telling you about it. They need to be brought in, and we have found that unless they are brought in, mistakes can be made. The wrong option is gone down. But with the monitor evaluator, it can be quite difficult because they don't want to be pressured into making a decision, because for them, it's about making the right decision, not the quickest decision. So you can again see where there may be conflict, and they'll be going, whoa, I haven't had time yet to go through everything. Just leave it be. But we need a result now. You may need a result now, but you need the right result. Again, conflict happens there. When you're working with a monitor evaluator, one thing which is a good idea is to give them lots of the information beforehand. Give them all of the research beforehand, give them all of the data beforehand, give them time to go through it all, and then ask them to contribute during a meeting. Otherwise, you're not going to have any engagement. We then have a specialist and a specialist behaviour. They have a deep love of their subject area. They have a deep dive into a particular subject area. They got lots of letters after their name normally because they've got really high professional standards. They've never stopped learning. And again, when it comes to communicating, sometimes you can ask a specialist one question and you're still listening to them 25 minutes later because you've got them in their zone and you're thinking, I don't know if I need this information, but people, they just want to tell you everything that they know, which is great, but sometimes their allowable weaknesses, they only contribute on quite a narrow front. But again, we need to work out how much of the specialist input we needed and how best to manage that in a communication style. Okay, so we have the task people who get stuff done quickly, organized, and with a high level of detail. We have the thought roles, the ones that are thinking about new ways of doing things, weighing up the options and having a deep dive into a particular area. We then have the social roles. Now, the social roles, they communicate quite well, actually, if you take communication as talking. So we have the coordinator, and the coordinator are the ones who are like the conductor of an orchestra. They know where they're meant to be going, and they are great at identifying talents and bringing people in as and when required. Their allowable weakness is sometimes they delegate a bit too much, and you wonder what on earth they're doing with their cup of tea and their feet on the desk. They would say that delegation itself is work, and they're there to make sure that everybody stays in the same, to the same aim, that broad sort of strategic objective. So when you're looking for a coordinator, you would hear words such as, let's go around the room and introduce ourselves to check that, everybody's there. Everybody knows what talents everybody has. Thank you for that. That was a useful point. Or let me just check that we have understanding here. So they were always checking that everybody is with them. They're the ones who perhaps should be chairing meetings. They're the ones who should be organising the meetings. We then have the resource investigator, and they're the ones who are just never in the office because they know everybody. They're exploring opportunities left, right, and centre. They're great negotiators, and they are the ones that bring ideas from outside in. Their allowable weakness is that they sometimes forget to follow up because they get bored incredibly easily. So how to best involve them? We'll make sure that they're around to start with, but don't put them too much don't expect too much detail from them with the resource investigators. Let them go out and do their thing. And then we have the team workers, and the team workers are the ones who care, the ones that see everybody within the team as a human being with feelings. They are the ones that listen incredibly carefully. They're the ones who we actually, within our team, when we all went into lockdown, we found our team workers within our team and tasked them to check how everybody was, because they're the ones that people will talk to. So they're great at communicating on a one-to-one basis. Their allowable weakness, however, is that they don't like being put under too much pressure because they don't like to upset anybody. They don't want to take sides. So how they'd be, oh no, can we just check that so-and-so is okay with that? You'd hear lots of questions which were very personal and about people. So,
just before we get into the next phase, and apologies, you may answer this. It was kind of not so much a question, but more of a statement, but it leads to a question. So, when someone does these reports, it will come out with a strength. Mm-hmm. How rigid is it that they'll have that perhaps one key strength, and i.e. that someone's commented around perhaps, I don't know, in a work environment, they're typically this, but actually outside of work, they might be something completely different.
Absolutely. Do you know, that is a brilliant question. Thank you. Belbin measures behavior. Okay, it's not a personality type. This isn't insights. This isn't MBTI. This isn't DISC. This is looking at the behavior, the way that we interact. And it's a work-based tool. So when you fill out the question, I think about 30 or 40 of you have, you'll notice that the questions are all relating to work. So yes, you'd expect your behaviour to change depending on the situation that you're in, of course. In fact, I'm going to quickly go to a different slide here because I can answer that, I think, using this one here. What we're doing here is we're describing the verb of what you do. It's not the noun of who you are, and who you are, down the pub might be different. Yeah. So yes, we will change depending on our personality, our mental abilities, our values and motivations. They change, don't they, as we go through life? What gets you up in the morning? Our experiences of different teams, different managers, different organizations, different cultures. All of these things will affect our behavior. Our external influences, mergers, acquisitions, things that we can do absolutely nothing about. COVID. This all influences the way that we behave. So we expect people to change and behave. This is a work-based tool. So this is just how you are behaving in the workplace with the team that you are with at the time. So when you fill in the questionnaire, make sure you have your team in your head when you're filling it out. So behavior changes, and also we're a myriad of all 9 of these roles. None of us are just one. We shouldn't pigeonhole ourselves. What we need to know is these are the behaviors that the team needs. Which ones can I play right now, depending on what the needs of the team are? That was a very long-winded answer. I do apologize. Has that helped?
I think so, yeah, and it actually leads quite nicely into two questions that are fairly similar but opposites at the same time. So one question there is that have you got any tips for if you're new into a management role with an already established team? Is there any tips around to that? And then there's kind of a same question but the other way around, is how do you select a team to build them up?
Well, these are 2 completely different webinars, and I'll be delighted to come back at any time. But very briefly, if you're a manager to an existing team, so a new manager going in, the first thing to do is find out about each individual within the team, spend time with them, sit down with them, have a one-to-one, and work out how they prefer to work best. Obviously, I'm going to recommend using the Belbin reports there as one way of having a framework and a language to be able to explain that. But if you're new, don't just go straight into the work. I think we all do that. We think, right, new manager, what have I got to achieve? Right, off we go. Just back up a bit and spend time over coffee, half hour, sit down and work out how each person within the team prefers to work, prefers to communicate, because you're going to save yourself so much time and potential conflict further down the line. So I really would recommend that. So that was if you are a new manager within an existing team. What was the next one, Kevin?
And then it's kind of the flip. So if you're looking to build a team up.
First thing, if you're looking to build a team up, is what's the objective of the team? What is the team there to do? Once you have clarity and understanding around the objectives, then you can work out what behaviors you need for that to happen. So if it's something about perhaps the objective of your team is to come up with a new marketing strategy. That's a bit broad, isn't it? But let's go with that. So you need to say, right, we need new. So we need to involve the plant and resource investigator. We need stolen ideas from elsewhere. We need original ideas. Then what do we need? Okay, we need somebody to work out the best way of doing this. We need the monitor evaluator. So you work out which behaviors you need, and sometimes you'll need more than others. Sometimes you won't need as much plant. Perhaps you'll need more completed finisher. It really depends on the objective of the team. Then work out the behaviors and then work out who can play those behaviors particularly well for the benefit of the team, and for them to know which behaviors that they need to play and when they need to play them.
That's a really good point. And it's about, I guess, looking at the strengths of what you need as a team at that particular time. Not so much people, but the strengths and skills.
Yeah. And that's, I think, the difference with Belbin. We start with what does the team need. This isn't about, it is about individuals, but it's starting with the fact that if a team is going to be effective, it needs access to all 9 of those distinct behaviors, not 9 people, but 9 behaviors. Then we work out who there is who can make that best contribution. So it's always starting with the team. And therefore, as individuals, we need to flex and change our strengths depending on what the needs of the team are at that particular time. Okay. So we've gone through 9 roles. That's quite a lot. That's why I broke them down into those 3 action roles, those 3 thinking roles, and those 3 social roles. So that's okay, isn't it? So I'm going to find out my strengths and I'm going to use those, and I can understand the strengths of other people. Straightforward. If you've got your own Belbin reports because you've gone through and done that, this will be the first page. You think, easy. I'm sharing mine, by the way. It's an old one. It's not a new one. I'm not that open and honest. So this is the page, and you could say, right, I know myself now. I've filled in the questionnaire. And from my perspective, I am a coordinator and a shaper. These are my top contributions. I like to lead from the front, and I have what I need to achieve and to drive things forward. I'm really not very high on team worker. I'm not very good at monitor, evaluator, implementer, completer, finisher. Those other three in the middle there, my resource investigator, my plant, and my specialist are okay. I can play those roles if I need to, but this is me. Excellent, job done. What is the problem with that? It's a good starting point. Very often we complete these questionnaires, and they could be BuzzFeed quizzes or whatever, and we get the results and we go, yeah, do you know, that's so me. I really agree with that. And it's because you filled it in the first place. Yeah, if any of these questionnaires and tools have good validity, they've got so much research behind them, but hopefully you're not going to not recognize what comes back because you've completed the questionnaire. And that's okay to a point if we all have amazing self-awareness. – 10 to 15% of people are actually self-aware. This was a big study. This was based in Harvard Business Review, and it had over 5,000 people within it, and it was looking at self-awareness. We all believe, a high percentage of us believe we are self-aware, but only 10 to 15% people actually are. And, you know, you can understand that in a way because we're not taught how to become self-aware, are we? There's certain questions we need to ask and develop, and it's a whole different level. We need to be able to get self-aware. And how do we do this? Well, we need to ask people for feedback. They go on in this study to talk about self-awareness not being one truth, but a balance of two distinct, even competing viewpoints. Tasha Eurich, the author of the study, recommends that we get feedback from our loving critics, people who we work with, but who are prepared to tell us the truth. At this point, I know there's some of you going, oh, 360-degree feedback, I've had a really negative experience. Or, oh, we've tried to do this feedback thing before and it really wasn't great. And in fact, it caused more harm than good. Some of you also have had incredibly positive experiences. But it's crucial that we get it. We want to see how we see ourselves, but also, especially when it comes to communication, we need to know how other people are seeing us. We need to reflect on that. And then we have this enhanced understanding. So when you go back and you complete the Belbin self-perception inventory, you'll get a report based on you, how you see yourself. And it's really a brilliant starting point. But then if you go back to the account and click on a button that says ask how others see you, you can ask for what we call observer feedback, your loving critics, people that you work with who know you well. You need a minimum of 4 people to get feedback on you because otherwise it could just be your best mate. We need consensus of opinion is what we're after. And then we can see how they see us as well. So I saw myself as high coordinator, shaper, and my observers are seeing it too, but they're also seeing far higher resource investigator. All that they've done is ticked words that relate to the strengths and the weaknesses of each of these team roles. They've not had to do any free form fields. There's no sentences. It's just ticking words that they think are associated with me. So they see that I'm broad in outlook, outgoing, but competitive and caring. I didn't see much team worker in myself, and somebody who seizes opportunities and is quite impulsive. Well, that's interesting. So how I thought I was behaving within the team isn't the same as what other people are seeing. Let's put all those observers together. Where are the gaps? Look at that resource investigator gap there, that first one, that pink one. How I see the resource investigator in myself, how other people see it is very different. Again, with the team worker, the green bar. So I have strengths I didn't realize I had. But also some strengths that I thought I'm not projecting as clearly perhaps as I'd like to because people aren't quite seeing them. This is so useful when it comes to understanding how to communicate with people. Find out how they see your communication. I'm just going to whiz through some of this. There'll be lots of other pages and advice on these, but let's look at it from a communication point. You also get this page and you find out which team roles your observers have seen. Now, going back to that question we had is, how do you manage a new team? Well, after you've managed them for a while, it would be a good idea to get them to give feedback on you. And then you can see which team roles, which behaviours they're seeing the most. And you think, well, what is my relationship with that person? What perhaps are their team roles? And then you can work out a communication strategy between you. Nigel Belbin used to be my boss before we became an EOT. And you can see that he sees my shaper behaviour down as number 5. And that's because I don't know if you've ever tried to shape your boss to tell you, come on, let's get it done, stop faffing. They don't appreciate that. I learned that my relationship with Nigel was to be able to listen, to do stuff, to roll up my sleeves, be very practical, but to listen and come up with a few new ideas of ways of doing things. And that's what he saw. That's therefore informed the way that I communicated. I know that Stuart's got incredibly high teamwork. He's got incredibly low shaper. So he's really seeing my shaper come to the fore. I just need to be careful about that. Because he's seeing it, he'll be seeing the positives and the negatives. We need to be able to bear that in mind when working with them. And these are the words that they use. So that's all they're doing, is ticking these words, 1 or 2 of them. They're going to give a double tick to some of the words. And again, this is how other people are seeing your communication. I know that they see that I'm bored and outgoing, competitive, caring. These are all great, see as opportunities. But look down there, they see sometimes that I'm a little bit impatient. They see that I'm a little bit impulsive. Okay. So when I'm communicating, perhaps when I'm running a team meeting and I'm coming up with different ways we need to do things, do the rest of my team know that I've thought those through? Well, perhaps not if I've got impulsive quite high up. Are they going to listen to me? Probably not. Will they be thinking, oh, Joe's just read something else and decided we're doing something different again? Probably. The wonderful thing about your behaviour is that it can change. We can alter it. We've discussed that. So what I've looked at these words and said, right, I don't want to be as impulsive as I was. I want people to not think that this is just a knee-jerk reaction. So I have put in place a plan. I now work with Stuart, who's a very high monitor evaluator. And we drive each other mad, but we know we do, and that's okay, because we've got completely different ways of looking at things. But I use him as a sounding board. And only after it's been gone through Stuart, been ME'd, will I then bring that idea to the rest of the team. And they now know that it's been thought through. It's not as impulsive. And so that word has now come right down, because you can redo this. You can measure how your behaviour changes.
Just a question on that, Joe, and there's a quite an appropriate one. So it's, how do you actually ask your team to give feedback without bias?
I think start again. Tell them why you want it. So asking for feedback, it's really important, is asking people why you want the feedback. So if you are managing a team, you're asking your team for feedback because you want to see how you are communicating and the strengths and weaknesses other people are seeing, so that you can manage them better. People within the teams, so I can become a better team colleague, so we understand each other a bit better, and I can understand my impact on you, and therefore I can use that to inform our relationship.
So I guess it's a win-win, isn't it? Where it benefits you, but it also benefits them as well.
Absolutely. I think sometimes we go a little bit cloak and dagger on this, whereas we need to be open, we need to be honest, and we need to say, I need some feedback, so that it benefits the team, it benefits our working relationships. Because how do you know if you're being confrontational and pushy unless people are going to tell you? We're not that self-aware. We know these things. Only 10 to 15% of us perhaps know that. It's useful to get that, and just having those ticks, just having those words, it really helps.
Yeah, it's a question from me, actually, which relates to something you mentioned earlier, actually. In terms of these reports, especially, I guess, if you're new to managing certainly an existing team, how often would you sort of recommend redoing one of these reports, as an example? And I can kind of relate to that as well, because I took over a team in 2022, And I did a report then, and I've recently done one, obviously, as part of this. And I have seen a change in my results there. Yeah. And that's what's a circa 18 months difference.
Do you know, it's so important because we change, don't we? Our behavior changes because of all of those things, you know, the experience, all of this again, it changes. So we need to see how our behavior changes. It could be that you do it after each project. Some people have an annual Belbin review. Some people only do it when there's change ahead. Some people do it as part of a development plan. But it's like going to the doctors, isn't it, and having a cholesterol check. As you go, you get cholesterol check. They've told you it's far too high. But what you need to do is X, Y, and Z to be able to make it lower, to make it better. And this is what we're saying with Belbin. You're starting now. This is your level of everything. Where do you need it to go? What are you going to do to make sure that next time you go, these things have changed? So we need to keep on top of it, because what we don't want to do at Belbin is pigeonhole people and say, right, and we have this a lot. People come up to us and say, oh, I've done Belbin, I was a plant. Oh, that's interesting. What are your other team roles? You know, which other team roles influenced that? And they don't know because they're a plant. I said, how long ago was it that you found out that you were a plant? And they'll go, oh, about 15 years ago. Okay. What has changed in your life? What has changed, not necessarily outside, but changed within your working life? Are you still a really high plant? And you realize that people have pigeonholed themselves. And I get that, because sometimes we like something to hang our coat on, don't we? We like to say, this is me. But that's such a shame, because we're wonderfully complex people. And we do change, and we need to understand how our changes are manifesting themselves in terms of our behavior. And that will inform, again, the communication that we have with people. Really important. It's a really good question. Keep at it. It's an ongoing process. You as a person are never done. You'll never tick yourself off the list. We are always learning and developing. I'd just like to raise this. I know we've got about 10 minutes or so. Maybe about 4. I'm going to try and keep this quite short for some more questions, actually.
Yeah, we've got a few questions building up.
So communication is all about understanding and appreciating the difference of people within your team. It's about understanding that you need to be aware of the way in which people prefer to be communicated with, finding out their behavioral strengths, using Belbin as a framework to be able to have those conversations. What's also really important in communicating is, what are you communicating? Are you communicating a task? Are you communicating a responsibility? Are you communicating with an individual, or are you communicating with a team? This will also affect the method and the way in which you communicate. So, for example, if you're delegating a task to an individual, you need to give them really clear direction. If you're communicating a responsibility to a team, that's a different level. You just need to have that really high level. This is what I want you to achieve by when, off you go. So it's really important that we look at what we're communicating, but also how we're communicating. Is it on a one-to-one, meetings, email, online, large meetings? Because again, remember the team worker who doesn't like to be put under pressure? Perhaps they need to be spoken to on a one-to-one, not in front of everybody. Maybe that monitor evaluator, you need to have a one-to-one first for them to be able to present something back when you're having a team. Maybe that specialist is best to communicate on email, because it's going to go on for quite some time, so you can bring out the things that you need for the team. It's really important that we look at the what and the how we're communicating as well. I don't need to say anything about that slide. It's about understanding everybody in the team, that you're all different, and communication therefore needs to differ and change for each of those people within the team. Because going back to that question, what do I do if I'm new in? Spend more time with the team before you try and do any work. Spending time with the team and understanding them is crucial. We don't spend enough time there. Just inheriting a team, expecting to just go off and start producing the work that needs to be done. No, just stop for a bit. Just that's Meredith Belbin, and he is going to be 98 next week. Just thought I'd put that in there. He's still around, and we still talk to him on a regular basis. Communication is really tricky. They will go to some questions now, I think, but communication is really hard. People think that there should just be a really easy book of how to communicate. And it's something that we need to work on. We need to work on understanding how we communicate and how others prefer to communicate, and having that conversation to meeting them at halfway points. So instead of there being friction and conflict, there's understanding and there's appreciation. And you can go forward ensuring that communication is not ever going to be perfect, but it's going to be better using that.
Fantastic. Okay, let's just run through some questions. We've got a couple of pre-submitted questions as well. We'll capture them at the end of these. So one question there is, how best can I effectively communicate to a team in the best way, adaptable to the individual personalities of the group?
Because we may only have one platform and we've got one way. One way is to be conscious of that. Okay, so when I've been communicating now, Rogers, is that I am very conscious that there will be some specialist monitor evaluators listening to this webinar. So I will make sure that I reference the quotes and the data that I'm coming up with. There'll be bits of it where you want the enthusiasm of everybody else to come with you. So you may, for those social roles, you may try and communicate and sometimes bring the energy levels up. You may ask people individual questions. You may ask people to have a think and go into breakout rooms and come back so that they can present you with things. It's a way of not doing it in 9 different ways, but trying to think, okay, within my team, how am I going to get the most out of them, and how can I put enough variance within what I'm doing to be able to get to the final objective? If you just do a PowerPoint presentation with bullet points and graphs on it because you're really high implementer specialist, you're going to be losing a lot of your team. If you decide to break that up with a bit of Q&A, with a bit of asking them questions, you're going to keep people together for longer.
Yeah, I guess it's a tough one, that it's very down. It sounds a bit of a cliche, but it's right down to the individual, isn't it? It's understanding them. And come back to your quote or amendment to Richard Branson's quote is about how they would like to be treated. And
absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, next question then is, any tips for a team where business owner has a culture of self-trust and rejection on C-suite's suggestion in SME? So I'm just trying to unpick that as I speak.
Okay.
And yeah, so as a C-suite COO, how can we improve to have effective communications?
Okay, I think there's a lot to unpack there, isn't there?
Yeah.
With SMEs, I think it is more difficult, because I think with the smaller organizations, especially when you're looking at the owners and the people who perhaps have set those business owners, there's a lot of emotional attachment to things, and you're holding the business because you've seen it probably start. So there's a lot more to it, isn't there? Within the SME, what we need to do is check that the business owner hasn't just recruited people like them. Hasn't just recruited people who they feel that they can work with. And so it's a really good idea with SMEs to just check, what do you need for the future? Because you may have a very distinct culture because of the way in which the company has grown around that business owner. That's fine. But you need to stop and say, right, now what other behaviours are there? What else do we need? And we need to value those. So there may be a little bit of a rock in the boat when it comes to culture at some point, but it does need to happen. Okay, I don't know if I've answered that particularly well. I think that's a longer conversation.
It's a big topic there, isn't it?
There is.
I'm just conscious of time. We are really starting to run out of time now, but just a couple of statements as well. So someone said that, interestingly, their top 3 has stayed the same over 30 years.
Wow.
But they do tend to sort of move around a little bit, but it was usually related to the type of job that they've been doing leading up to the assessment.
Yeah, so that's very true. Yeah. What we tend to find is, people's least preferred roles don't suddenly become their top roles. It's very rare you'll find a complete change. But yeah, so those looking at those top 3, where are they? Ebb and flow, don't they? There's an ebb and flow for those. It'd be interesting to know, Sarah, whether or not your observers have seen any change. So whether or not you've seen it, but is that being backed up by the rest of the people in your team, would be really interesting.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And there's two questions that are similar that relate to, so what if team used bias and judgment, and then similar to that, and how do you ensure that there's real transparency and not hidden agendas behind the surface when looking at the roles? I guess there's an element of trust and within the team there, isn't it? And understanding the win-win that we explained earlier.
Open and honest communication can only happen where there is trust, psychological safety. And that takes a while to build up. Again, it's not a tick box, I know we trust each other now, tick. How can you create that culture is by, first of all, getting people to talk about themselves as people, getting the job titles to one side and getting people to say, look, this is me. These are my strengths and weaknesses. This is where I need to be. So you then, once you have that understanding of people within the team, you're more likely to have an element of trust or building up some of that trust. How do you ensure real transparency and not having hidden agendas? One, to make sure everybody is open, explaining, who they are. And Patrick Lencioni, if you want to look at 5 dysfunctions of a team, puts this beautifully. The other way I'd say is lead the team without any opaqueness and lead the team without any hidden agendas. How you lead the team is really important. The culture of the team will be led by the way that you're leading it and managing it. So really think about that. And also, why not have the conversation? This is one of my hobby horses, is if you're worried about it, why not sit down at one of your meetings and say, ask that question. How can we ensure that we have real transparency when we're working with one another? How can we make sure that other things aren't going on which may not benefit the rest of the team? Discuss. I think sometimes as managers and leaders that we are expected to have all of the answers. I'd say that we don't, but what we do have the power of is to ask the questions back again, and we can get to the answers with the teams that we lead.
No, really good point. Really good point. So just jumping into the pre-submitted questions. I'm sorry, I don't think we're going to make all of the questions on here. Maybe we can look at answering those offline. But so there's a question from Rona. What is the best communication mix for remote teams? Is that hybrid working environment? Again, you could probably talk for an hour on this alone.
We have actually got a whole webinar on this because we did lots of research during the pandemic when people were working mainly remotely, and to see which team roles were more engaged. It's a really interesting mix. One thing we would say is when working remotely, what we found that is although individual engagement went up, team engagement did go down. Again, it's making that assumption that we all know everything and off we go and just continue working. We need to spend more time working out how we're going to work together when we are working remotely. But it won't surprise you to know that the plant's monitor evaluators and the specialists, they love working from home because they didn't have to talk to anybody. There's nobody interrupting them. They could just be in their own zone. It was wonderful. The team workers not so happy because they need people. They wanted to see what people are up to. So yeah, there was lots of differences. There's a study on our website that you can download.
And that's a nice segue, actually. In terms of working alone, so the next one from Heather that was a pre-submitted, and this is the last one, was any strategies for communicating with introverts? So there's the, like you say.
Yeah, absolutely. Just because somebody's introversion means that they recharge by themselves. It doesn't mean that they can't communicate. It just means that they need to recharge in different ways. Introversion itself shows up in a myriad different ways, as does extroversion. Both of those don't show up as one component. So I would say finding out what type of introvert they are and using the Belbin framework to do that is incredibly useful. Are they introverted because they are a high plant? Or is it because actually introverted? Because, there's so many different ways that can show itself. So it's understanding a little bit more about that introversion first.
Great stuff. Okay, one final question from me, and then obviously we'll refer to the socials. But in terms of if there's sort of three key takeaways that the core message, I guess, from today, what would your top 3 be?
Communication is really difficult. You're not, now you've been here for an hour, you're not suddenly going to be great at communicating. It's really difficult. So spend some time working it out. The second one I would say is that we are all different and we all communicate in different ways. And I don't just mean transmit, we also listen in different ways. Yeah, it's a two-way thing and we're all different there. So understanding and appreciating these differences, point number 3, is going to help you devise a communication strategy with everybody within your team and your team as a whole. It's hard. We're all different. Understand and use that difference.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And if anyone wants to get more information, obviously the links are in front of us here, I guess.
Just contact us. That's fine.
Yeah, and the report, as we say, there's only a week left to go on that, so grab that whilst you can. That's really all for me. So thank you very much, Jo. I believe we're going to hand back to the team now.
Yep. Thank you so much for inviting us. Thank you, Cleo. You've been amazing. Thank you, Kevin. Good luck to everybody.
Thanks for your time, Jo. Much appreciated.
All right, so that's it for today's session. Thank you to our host, Kevin, and our speaker, Jo, for your insight and expertise. Please stay tuned to hear more about CMI membership, and thank you all for joining us.
Don't forget, as a CMI member, you can find the latest management and leadership insights at managers.org.uk. If you're not yet a member, join our community to discover CMI Confidence with on-demand resources, our network of mentors, and industry-leading accreditations.